And welcome back, everybody, to the Shoop and Tian extravaganza. This is your NFC North preview. We are now on Division 7 of 8, and you know what that means. We are hella close to football. Preseason is officially over with. We're getting down to the final roster cuts now, but we still got, of course, a couple divisions more to go through. But now we have an even better idea of how these teams might be faring this upcoming season, Jan. How does it feel now that preseason is officially done with?
I know, it's crazy. This is it. The next football that we're going to see, the next NFL football that is going to be regular season football. It's going to be the Chiefs and Ravens on opening night. Almost, 10 days from now? So it's very, very exciting. We're in that final countdown, and yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah, it's going to be very exciting. One of those teams will be playing on Friday for the NFC North. That'd be the Green Bay Packers, and there's one of the teams that we'll be covering in today's preview of the NFC North, which was surprisingly one of the better divisions in football last year, with very top heavy, of course, but the top two teams made it to the playoffs and made some noise in the playoffs. So 3 playoff wins combined in this division last year, and it might have even gotten stronger this year. So lots to talk about today. Very exciting. This should be a fun division to break down. Lots of changes, but not a lot of changes with this one team. And that is the first team we're going to be talking about. Last year's division champions, last year's near NFC representative in the Super Bowl. The Lions had I believe, a 17-point lead at halftime of that NFC Championship game last year before their inexperiences kind of caught up with them. And unfortunately lost to the 49ers. But for Detroit Lions fans, that was maybe the best season that a lot of fans have ever witnessed.
Oh, yeah.
It was absolutely nuts. Tian, what led to the turnaround of this Lions franchise?
Yeah, I mean, the best way to describe last season for the Lions is met and exceeded, right? Like going into the season, they were everyone's darling. They were the team that everyone was like, oh, the roster is really coming along. Love Dan Campbell as the head coach. Love the offensive coaching staff. Everything was going right for them. And a lot of times you see teams like that and they just don't meet those expectations. Well, the Lions did that in winning their division and then exceeded them by getting to the NFC Conference Championship. I mean, there's so many reasons why the Lions are as good as they are. They're maybe one of my favorite rosters in the NFL and just how they've built it up and what they are sort of built on. Obviously, part of that is due to the fact that they were able to get some pretty good players by having some pretty high draft picks, but you still got to hit on those draft picks and more. And they have absolutely done that. They've established a culture there as well. That sort of biting of the kneecaps that Dan Campbell teaches. And last year, it really all coalesced and allowed them to reach that level that they have been looking for really their entire franchise history. You said that anyone's ever seen, or, most people have ever seen. This might have been the best Lions season in their history. When you just think about how they met the expectations and then exceeded them for the entirety of last year. And it has a lot of Lions fans excited for what's to come.
Yeah. Dan Campbell is a breath of fresh air. So when he came into the league, I believe 3 years ago was his first season, the Lions did not have a good record at all. But he kept them a really bad roster, competitive every single week, and the players fought hard for him. And fans began to see something kind of brewing. The next year they have to a poor start, but finished really strong to end the year. And then, of course, expectations last year met and exceeded them. So Dan Campbell, props to him. I mean, he might be everyone's favorite coach. I mean, rah guy. Hard not to root for the guy. Another guy that's hard not to root for is Jared Goff. Kind of cast away from LA in the Matt Stafford trade. Stafford goes on to win the Super Bowl, and it's thought that the Lions, they're going to be rebuilding. Just Jared Goff is a bridge quarterback. Well, not so much. Well, Goff was instrumental in turning around the Lions as well as Campbell, and he was rewarded with a huge contract. Now, in your opinion, do you think Goff is more of like a guy that's good enough to get this team there, or do you think that he's underrated, that people aren't giving him enough credit?
It's interesting. I mean, I think the real answer is it's kind of in between. I do think he's more than just a good enough guy. Like, I think when you look at him compared to the other quarterbacks in the NFL, he's certainly in the upper half. I think what people don't love about Goff is that compared to these other guys, these other quarterbacks at the top, he doesn't create as much, right? He's not as big a playmaker. And, even, his whole career, he's been a guy that, he's a pocket quarterback. He's not really going to run that much. He's not elite at reading a defense, although he's probably getting better throughout his career. But he's got a really great and accurate arm. And with the way the Lions are constructed, especially something we're going to talk about, that offensive line, he's able to just stand back there and pick apart a defense with the weapons that they put around him. And yeah, I do think he's better than a just get them there guy. One thing you were saying for the Lions and for Jared Goff's career in general, he's probably going to be remembered as a Lions player. Like that's probably going to be, when we look back at his career, the team that he's most remembered for, which is crazy because he helped lead a Rams team to a Super Bowl, right? I feel like people forget that he played in a Super Bowl. And so I think if you're one of those guys that brought a team there, you are in that conversation of being able to go that next level and actually win that big game.
Yeah, people forget that Jared Goff led the Rams there. Now, that Super Bowl, of course, was very forgettable. And it was clear that Sean McVay didn't have belief in Goff. But as Dan Campbell says, you're good enough for Detroit, Goff. So the connection there is amazing. Now, we talk about the rest of this offensive group, and I have a fun little question for you. So, you got the playmakers on offense with Gibbs and Laporta, rookies from last year who came into the scene and were instant impact for the Lions. Amon-Ra St. Brown has already put himself in the top 5 wide receivers in the NFL. And, of course, David Montgomery, touchdown machine. And then you got that great offensive line led by Penei Sewell, who's very young, but is already maybe the top tackle in the NFL, if not the top 5. Veteran Taylor Decker, Graham Glasgow on that interior. So my question to you is, if you had to, pick a position group for a franchise like that you're starting, would you rather have these young Lions skill players or this Lions offensive line? Who would you rather build your team around?
That's tough. I mean, I'm a guy, I think I'm a guy like you got to build through the trenches. That's like my, I think you look at NFL history, the teams that win in the trenches on both sides of the ball are the teams that end up, in the big games at the end. And so I'd pick the offensive line. But the guys you mentioned, I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta, and Amon-Ra St. Brown, you can make an argument that all 3 of those guys are top 5 at their positions, like already. And you think about Gibbs and Laporta were rookies last year. I mean, think about that rookie class. So I would take the offensive line because I think it's like elite. I mean, I'm not really sure there's much of an argument that this isn't the best offensive line in the NFL. Shades of a few years ago with the Eagles and that amazing offensive line, they are that good and they're very good both in pass protection and running the football. And so I'd pick them, but you can't go wrong with either question. I mean, both of those groups, it kind of just shows how they've constructed this roster. Both elite groups, the skill position players and the offensive line.
Yeah, playmakers all over the offense, stars on the offense, but it's not like this defense is bad or anything. They've held their own quite well. I mean, part of what Dan Campbell preaches as a coach is gritty, like tough players, and we saw it with the defense, the hard-hitting defense. I mean, some really hard hits. I mean, Kirby Joseph stands out as a guy that's like a super hard hitter. You got Aiden Hutchinson on that D-line, who, he was drafted number 2 overall. Another immediate hit for Brad Holmes.
Right.
Speaking of Brad Holmes has done an amazing job. He's got to get a lot of credit for building this roster too, but he's hit on draft pick after draft pick. Hutchinson, one of the elite pass rushers in the NFL. So that's a couple studs on this defense, but who are some other studs on this defense that I didn't mention that make a big impact for this team?
Yeah, so 2 guys I want to talk about are actually in the secondary. One was a rookie last year and one is a rookie this year. And the guy last year was Brian Branch, who came in and really was, I think, underdrafted last year because people viewed him as solely a nickel corner, and they weren't really sure how he was going to fit on defenses. Well, if you're good, you can fit anywhere, and that was kind of the Lions' mindset with drafting him. And so he immediately had an impact. Dealt with some injuries last year, which was unfortunate, but he's going to be coming back and being a very crucial part of this secondary for Detroit. And then the rookie this year is their first pick, Terrion Arnold, in the draft, who young corner, kind of a little bit undersized maybe, but feisty. He can stick right to receivers as they go. Very good in man coverage. And so adding him to improve the secondary, which I think coming into the offseason was the weakest part of this Lions defense, bringing in a young guy like Terry Arnold who could have an immediate shutdown impact is going to be huge for this defense as a whole, especially to help, you mentioned Aiden Hutchinson and the other guys on the defensive line. If you improve the secondary just a little bit, suddenly those guys are going to be able to get home and sack the quarterback a lot more this year.
Yeah, and they didn't only just go out and get Arnold. I mean, so the Lions, their cornerback 2 spot was their weak spot last year. Cam Sutton was holding down the cornerback 1 role of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson at corner, but Gardner-Johnson and Sutton are both gone. So the Lions bring in 4 corners in the offseason. Their top 2 draft picks, you mentioned Arnold and Ennis Rakestra, who was once getting first-round buzz, but he was, I believe, a second-round pick. And then they bring in Carlton Davis, who, maybe lost a step with the Bucs, but he's definitely a good veteran leader, and Amik Robertson, who got a lot of playing time with the Raiders. So they definitely knew what their big need was, and they went ham on it. And don't forget about, of course, DJ Reader. I mean, there's a lot of talent on the D-line already. We didn't mention Aleem McNeil, who's coming into his own as one of the better players at his position. And now you bring in DJ Reader. Big body in the middle, formerly on the Bengals, and this is going to be a great defense yet again. I mean, top to bottom, this could be the best roster in the NFL. Does that sound correct?
I think it does. Like you said, just on paper, I mean, it's hard to not look at this roster and think that it is the best and most talented in the league. I think the one question you could have is depth. I think that's maybe the one thing you sit there and say, well, if some guys go down, but at the same time, that's with every team. You never know in that regard. And so, yeah, I mean, you look at the entire roster and really there's not many holes. And I think that really shows good teams from, not so great ones is looking at the Lions. There are no glaring holes. There's no point of their team where you say this is a huge weakness. They are good pretty much everywhere, and then they're also elite at some places. And obviously, coming into this season after last year, they've got high hopes.
Yeah, Lions complete from top to bottom. They're not the hunter anymore. They're going to be hunted. So it's going to be interesting when we come up for our preview later for the division standings. So, lots to highlight the Lions, but we got other teams in the division. And let's talk about the other team that made the playoffs in this division last year. That was the Green Bay Packers, who were not thought of as a playoff team coming into the year. Maybe a fringe playoff team. A lot of people didn't really believe in Jordan Love, but after this season, boy, do people believe in Jordan Love. I mean, first of all, the Packers mainly believe in him, that he got a big contract this offseason as well.
Yeah.
It's crazy how the Packers just can, draft the quarterback in the first round, give him 3 years to wait, and then he's a star. Like, they figured something out. I don't know what it is. What makes Jordan Love so special? Why did he get that big deal in the offseason?
Well, I think for starters, I want to give credit where I really think credit is due, which is head coach Matt LaFleur. In a way, I kind of think he's the most underrated coach in the league, just because I think the first few years, despite them having a lot of regular season success and falling short in the playoffs, but they were always in the thick of it. I think a lot of people credit Aaron Rodgers because of that, and they were kind of like, LaFleur kind of came in with a good roster, all those kind of things. But he had a vision for Jordan Love, and he had a vision for this team. And one of the big reasons is Jordan Love fits his offense, really to a T. The LaFleur, Shanahan offense is all about getting the ball in the hands of your playmakers, and that is what Jordan Love can do. He doesn't make a ton of mistakes. We saw it in their last postseason game last year that he did make the killer mistake at the end, but that really was not his MO for the entirety of the season. Now, it was a slow start, right? Last year they started 2-5, and all the naysayers were kind of, touting, hey, we called this team. We said they're not as talented. Jordan Love, would take some time to really acclimate to the role of starting quarterback for the Packers. But because LaFleur stuck with that game plan, Love just kept getting better and better and better. And the guys around him kept getting better and better and better as well. And so for a guy like Jordan Love to see that growth all in one season, I think really points to a very special player. And, yeah, he got paid this offseason, and he's no longer the we'll see what happens. He is the firm starter in Green Bay. And by the end of the season, we might be talking about him as a top 10 quarterback.
We definitely could be. I remember in particular that Sunday night football game against the Chiefs, where it was him
Yeah.
versus Mahomes, and if blindfolded yourself and you saw like the stats and the throws that were being made, you would have thought Love was Mahomes that game. Love was just so accurate and dialing up, getting the different receivers all over the field. I think that was the game where I'm like, okay, this guy's arrived. Like he's legit. Like if
Right.
anyone is actually watching the Packers, this guy's legit.
Yeah.
Part of what helps him, and we just talked about Brad Holmes and the Lions, how good that he's drafted. Well, the Packers have done a spectacular job, in particular, drafting weapons in not even like the first round, but like second, third, fourth rounds. I mean, look at all these guys. So you've got Christian Watson, who's been hurt, but he's been electric when he plays. Romeo Dobbs, Dontavian Wicks, Jaden Reed, Tucker Kraft, Luke Musgrave. All these guys are like early to mid round draft picks, and they play on all of them. I mean, when all of them played, they've come and filled their roles, and they've been very reliable weapons, and they're all on rookie contracts, which is insane. Like this could be the deepest group in all of football. Out of the guys that I mentioned, who's the guy that you like the most on this offense?
So I want to talk about just two guys. One that I think is maybe the most important, which is Jaden Reed, who's a guy that I think a lot of people thought was overdrafted last year. He was a second-round pick out of Michigan State, and people thought maybe he was a little bit small. Maybe you don't take a guy like that early. But like we were saying, the Packers just did such a great job of getting the ball in the guy's hands and letting him go to work. Right? He's electric when he's got the ball in his hands and in open field. The other guy I want to mention is Dontavian Wicks, who – besides Romeo Dobbs, who I think was kind of interesting, undrafted guy, obviously that's great value, but Wicks was a 5th-round pick last year. And he came in, and Matt LaFleur loved him all throughout training camp and said, hey, just you wait. He's going to be, he's going to come on and be a good receiver. And the reason I want to shout him out is because he was huge when you look at the second half of the Packers season last year, when they really needed those young guys to step up. He was at the forefront of that, and it helped them eventually get into the playoffs and win a game.
Yeah. Now, those great young receivers are, they stepped up big time, but the Packers did make a little bit of a change on offense in the offseason. They departed from longtime running back Aaron Jones, and now they bring in Josh Jacobs, a former rushing leader in the NFL. It's good yet to be seen like how they use Jacobs in this role, but I think the Packers wanted A.J. Dillon to kind of have like a bruiser type role. He was never able to fulfill that. And now they bring in Jacobs. What kind of do you think Jacobs has potential to like be a rushing leader in NFL on this offense, or do you think he's going to be more of a complementary piece?
Well, so the Josh Jacobs signing to me is like one of the most interesting ones this offseason, because part of me, like on paper, I love it because I feel like he was very good, especially towards the end in Las Vegas with the Raiders. One of his big things, even coming out of school, and I think it's kind of similar even right now, is, people think of him, maybe he's going toward the latter end of his career, but he does not have a lot of tread on his tires. He has not had that many carries in his career compared to other guys at his age. You think about guys similar, like a Tony Pollard or a Saquon Barkley, who have accumulated all these carries throughout their college and pro careers. Josh Jacobs, yes, especially for the past couple years, has been more involved in Vegas, but does not nearly have as much wear and tear as these other guys. And so I think they brought him in to really be a 3-down back in Green Bay and be a guy that, combines the best of Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. Obviously, they still have Dillon on the team. They still have Marshawn, or they just drafted the rookie running back Marshawn Lloyd, who I also think will have a role. And so I think Jacobs will be used as a complementary piece. But I think he is the most talented running back they've had in a while. And I'm curious to see just how much LaFleur is going to use him, especially in the red zone. I think that is where he may thrive. It's where Aaron Jones thrived. And you think maybe a guy that's a little bit younger, a little less banged up, and Jacobs, maybe he can have that role as well.
Yeah, and definitely a change of scenery. I mean, Jacobs definitely strikes me as a guy, one that gets down to December in Lambeau, a guy that will get the ball a lot and, help like ease some of the pressure off of Love. I think it's a great signing. But we never know with running backs as they get older. Sometimes they just fall off a cliff. But I think Jacob still has plenty of gas left in the tank. So I'm very excited to see how it turns out.
Yeah.
Flipping the script over to the defense, there's some questions on this defense. I mean, there were a few departures this offseason. Devondre Campbell, a couple of safeties, but they did make some replacements. The big one being Xavier McKinney at safety. He was signed over from the Giants. Was a big player, big playmaker for the Giants. So he'll certainly help out. I mean, he'll certainly help fill that role. But the Packers are most known for their pass rush. I mean, like they got a young receiving group, they got a young defensive line of guys that have been there for a few years now, like Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary. What are your thoughts about this defense heading into the season?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, and kind of going back to last year, like one of the reasons that people didn't like the Packers, one because they didn't think Jordan Love was going to be as amazing as he was just looking up and down the roster. You really didn't see that many elite players, but now you see all these guys sort of come out of the woodworks and really be contributors for the playoff team last year. And so number one, you think a lot of those guys are going to improve, right? The first round pick, Lucas Van Ness, another pass rusher, part of that group that you mentioned. They're going to rotate guys in a lot, but you're wondering if he can have a sort of emergence very similar to Rashawn Gary, who wasn't great for the first part of his career, but then really, really came along and got that big extension in this offseason. And so that is one thing I'm going to be looking at. You mentioned Xavier McKinney. They lost a couple safeties, but they gained a couple as well, him being the big payday that they gave out in this offseason. So I don't think there's much of a worry there. I think there's some question marks at the linebacker position. Quay Walker was a guy that they drafted that they had a lot of hope for, that I don't know if he's necessarily lived up to the hype. And then Edgerrin Cooper is a young rookie that they picked this year, hoping that he can sort of step also into that role and really hunker down the middle of that defense. But I do think there's talent questions on the defense. For the Packers' sake, I think they're hoping that their offense is going to be high-powered enough where it won't necessarily matter. And I wonder if we're going to see that defense be a little bit more opportunistic, really trying to go for turnovers, really trying to go for sacks, knowing that their offense is going to pick up some of the steam.
Yeah, my main concerns for the Packers on defense this upcoming season is the run game. The run defense hasn't been strong in the past. They got young linebackers in there. Someone from there, maybe it's Edgerrin Cooper, maybe it's somebody else, one of the other young linebackers on this team steps up, but someone's got to fill that role next to Quay Walker for the departed Devondre Campbell. And then can Eric Stokes, former first-round pick, can he live up to that billing across from Jair Alexander? They need a second corner. They tried a bunch of guys last year, and it was a weak spot. So those will be two positions that we're going to look out for, but certainly the Packers have a good enough offense that they will be ahead most of the time, and we'll see some exciting games. So that'll be fun.
And new Packers defense coordinator, Jeff Hafley, who some people may recognize because he went to Pascack Hills High School in Bergen County, New Jersey. He's coming over from being the head coach of Boston College. And so I think that's an interesting dynamic to see what he does coming from the college ranks. Obviously, he's had both college and pro experience. But I think that was one of the more interesting hires this offseason, wondering exactly what he's going to bring to that defense coming from the college ranks.
Mm-hmm. So lots of promise for Packers, a lot of returning players. So this team should be pretty good. That'll be interesting to factor into our division predictions later. Now we got maybe the most intriguing team coming into this season. So the Chicago Bears, for the last few years, have been pretty awful. I mean, Justin Fields, seen the film on Justin Fields, but the Bears made an amazing trade where they were able to get the Panthers' first-round pick, so the Panthers can go and get Bryce Young, and in return, they got the number one pick next year, which turned into none other than Caleb Williams. I mean, we hear a lot about generational quarterbacks coming in, but Caleb Williams, I think he might be more special than Trevor Lawrence. I think he might, I'm not going to say Andrew Luck, but this guy brings a lot of excitement. describe Caleb Williams like to people who maybe not are not in the loop.
He's like, oh, this is going to be such a bad thing to say, but because I mean, how much expectations can you put on a guy? But you're right, he is this level of prospect, but he's like if Kyler Murray, he's like if Aaron Rodgers had Kyler Murray's athleticism, and that is like that really is what to say. I mean, the best way to describe him, I think, is a magician. You know, he's not dissimilar to Mahomes in the sense that he's going to be a guy that when the play breaks down, you're going to rely on him. He's going to move around a lot. You're probably going to see a lot of highlight reel plays out of the backfield and maybe a lot of highlight reel throws. I don't think he has as elite an arm, certainly, as Mahomes or Aaron Rodgers, but that escapability is what makes him truly special, on top of having a really great arm, and ability to read a defense as well. And so, I mean, you said at the top, we just talked about two of what I think might be the best teams in the league, and yet the Bears are the team that a lot of people are looking at and saying, hey, hold on, they've got all this going for them. They're doing hard knocks. They've got Caleb Williams, the generational quarterback. I mean, the Chicago Bears have never had a 4,000-yard passer in their entire history. And now they're getting a guy that, like you said, I mean, he's really going to go in that echelon of best college prospects or best pro prospects to come out of college. And so very exciting for a Bears fan, especially when you think about all the highlights that he's going to produce this year.
Yeah. What about the highlights he's produced already? Like, I'm glad we did this video now because he had a couple of preseason drives and he made some fantastic plays already.
Yeah.
Like, come check them out if you haven't seen them. But yeah, so Caleb Williams is just one piece of the equation. I mean, he's the biggest piece of the equation, but there's a lot more going on with this Bears team. I mean, let's check out the weapons that they added. So they already brought in DJ Moore in the trade with the Panthers last year, where they didn't have any receivers. Now, all of a sudden, they bring in Keenan Allen from the Chargers, and they draft Rome Odunze with their own draft pick, number 9 overall. So you're pairing a dynamic rookie receiver, a reliable weapon, and a guy like DJ Moore that's done it already there in Chicago. And then you bring in some other guys, like DeAndre Swift, Gerald Everett, veterans that will help the process for Caleb Williams. I mean, the offensive line is a bit questionable, but where would you say this Bears offense stacks up among the rest of the league?
Well, skill position wise, I think it really does have a chance to be one of the best. They really leaned into this idea this offseason, which is if you get a young quarterback, your goal is to make him good. That's it. You surround him with as much talent as possible so that he could grow in the league, and that so you can sit there and say, like the Packers did with Jordan Love, oh, hey, we know we've got our guy because we know we've got the weapons for him, and we know that he's produced in the league. And so, they've got 3 really great receivers, kind of, interesting combination of receivers. DJ Moore is going to be that kind of deeper threat, a guy that you look downfield, but can also do some of the, short passing game. Tian, a lot more of an intermediate guy. Same with Rome Odunze. And, Rome Odunze coming into this draft, Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors were the big guys, but he was right there with them in terms of being some of the best wide receiver prospects, honestly, that we've ever seen. And so he's a guy that I think will come along for the rest of the year. You add in a pretty good running back room, and the offensive line is a little questionable, but we mentioned the escapability of Caleb Williams. One of the best things about a guy I just mentioned, Patrick Mahomes, is that the offensive line in Kansas City is great, but because Mahomes is so good at escaping, it makes the offensive line look so much better. And I'm wondering if it's going to be a similar thing this year with Caleb Williams.
Yeah, it's with all the weapons, it's really going to be hard for Caleb Williams to fail, at least long term, if he's got this crew around for quite some time. But there certainly will be growing pains. I mean, he doesn't seem like a guy phased, but there is a process for transitioning to the NFL. Trevor Lawrence had it. Peyton Manning had it. Patrick Mahomes didn't start his first year. I don't want to put too heavy expectations on him in year one, but they certainly have the playmakers to help him out and put this team at least, way better than they were the year before. And then, if you look on defense too, they didn't really add a a ton on defense, but this defense was pretty good last year, especially towards the end of the season when they added Montez Sweat to
Yeah.
enhance that pass rush. It was really a big boost, and it made the Bears much more competitive down the stretch. Um, the secondary has been, pretty good. That's been their mainstay for years, and linebackers too, with the big acquisitions a year ago with T.J. Edwards and Tremaine Edmonds. So they bring back a lot of those guys. What are you looking forward to on this defense the most?
Well, the guy you just mentioned, Montez Sweat. I mean, it was night and day with that defense and when he joined. And they've really been looking for that elite pass rusher since they had Khalil Mack. And pass rush was absolutely a weakness for them. And so they go out and trade for Sweat. They give him that big extension, and their defense really immediately changes. He's a guy that was looked at as a very good pass rusher, but you put him in that environment under head coach Matt Eberflus, who I think is a really great defensive mind. And that entire defense excelled just by adding one really very, very good pass rusher. And so having this defense now kind of come together after having an offseason is something I'm really interested in. It's a really interesting linebacking core as well. They paid big money for Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards last offseason, who I don't know if they lived up to the money, but still two really, really great linebackers. Then you mentioned the secondary. Overall, a very solid secondary when you look at Jaquan Brisker. They added Kevin Byard, who was with the Eagles last year. Not a big name, not the best season last year, but maybe a change of scenery and under a more defensive-minded head coach will get him back to the level that we have seen him at. So defense is intriguing because they have Matt Eberflus. I think it's going to be better than it appears on paper. I think there's still a lot of question marks, but overall a very exciting group.
Well, yeah, let's talk about Matt Eberflus for a second because, the Bears haven't had a great coaching history. I mean, they had Lovie Smith, but besides that, they've had terrible luck with coaches. Eberflus, I haven't really known a whole lot about him, haven't heard much about him. He seems kind of like an average guy. But do you think that it's more true that Eberflus might be carried by the talent by his roster, or do you think he has the ability to make this team, and help them reach their ceiling?
I mean, the answer, not really. I think he is the kind of coach that, he hasn't had a lot of talent on this team. That's for sure. And so this is really his big test, right? Now that you've got all this going together, credit to Ryan Poles, the GM, for pulling together that trade. And he's brought together a really, really interesting group of players, some highly touted prospects. And so now that you have that, it really is on Eberflus to say, okay, we've got all these guys, a lot of young guys as well. Time for you to bring them together. I think that for me is the biggest question mark with the Bears because I'm not convinced that he's going to be able to do it. However, I do think this team is talented enough to get to a point where Eberflus, even if this year he doesn't necessarily have it, I think the talent may be able to let him keep his job to then go into another season with Caleb Williams and all these young guys, further establish the culture that they're trying to build there in Chicago and sort of put the past few years behind them, get into this Eberflus era for sure, and know what kind of team they're going to be to compete in this division.
Yeah, and one final note, Caleb Williams is a big personality as much as he is a big talent. You need a coach for this team that can manage a personality like that. Somebody who can step in and, kind of lay down the culture, lay down the line for this team. There's an aspect of letting Caleb be Caleb. And then there's a part where you come in and say, okay, this is how we're going to do things. So It's very early on, but I can see Caleb Williams being the type of guy that, might let his personality take over. Hopefully it's in a good way, but, if Eberflus doesn't, stand up, be the leader, then there could be some mismatch there, and it could lead to Eberflus leaving town. So that'll be interesting dynamic to see.
For sure.
All right. So those are three very exciting teams in NFC North. And then we have the Vikings. It's Vikings fans would kind of agree because they did let go of Kirk Cousins. The Kirk Cousins era was filled with, ups, downs, mostly mediocrity. But Kirk Cousins did make the Vikings a very powerful offense, and he was a very good leader for this team. Unfortunately, the way he went out was great, but he had that huge contract, and he was the first alarm. he was the first first big QB contract, controversial one, way back when, like 3-4 years ago.
Yeah.
But so he's out of town now. They draft JJ McCarthy, and would love to talk about him, but he hurt his knee in the first preseason game. We're gonna have to wait till next year. So it is now Sam Darnold times. Sam Darnold, he's had like a mostly down career, especially with the Jets. Everyone's gonna remember him for seeing ghosts against the Patriots, just being a bust there. Couldn't beat out the competition in Carolina, and then he got hurt in Carolina too. But
Yeah.
was the backup for the 49ers. Comes to the Vikings, was going to be in a QB competition, but now he pretty much has the role to himself. I mean, sure, Darnold has had a disappointing career, but this is a huge opportunity for Darnold because Darnold, like a guy like Geno Smith resurrected his career when he got a starting role. Do you think Sam Darnold has any potential to do that, or do you think this is a lost season already?
It's so interesting because I really trust Kevin O'Connell, who's the head coach, and then Wes Phillips is the offensive coordinator. Both Sean McVay guys. They showed last year, right? They put so many different quarterbacks on that team because of Kirk Cousins' injury, and they had some pretty good success with each of them. Eventually, the talent just kind of caught up to them, and it led them to drafting JJ McCarthy to really get the quarterback of the future. And so, look, I believe in those guys. And I believe in Justin Jefferson, for one, who's arguably the best wide receiver in the league that they're going to have. And so, listen, this has definitely, I think, been the best situation for Sam Darnold's career. I know he was with the Niners last year, but he was firmly a backup there. And so, now that it really is like firmly Darnold's, and that is an interesting wrinkle to this. Is like, I think a lot of people were saying that he might win the starting job even when McCarthy was healthy, and then eventually you ease McCarthy in if things aren't necessarily going well. Right now, it's going to be Darnold. It is him from the beginning. And so that aspect of it is interesting. And I think it will help him a little bit, not really having to look over his shoulder and knowing that this is exactly, this is his job. You mentioned Geno Smith. I kind of see maybe more of a Baker Mayfield situation, right? Where he comes to this new team, fresh start, but he is firmly the starter and he ends up playing maybe a bit better than expectations and maybe gets an extension in the offseason. It would probably be with another team because they have McCarthy, but they have the weapons around him there. And they also have a pretty darn good offensive line as well. The vibes in Minnesota, which I'm sure we'll get to, are very strange right now. But, I think there is a chance that he can come out and play well. As someone who has watched Sam Darnold a lot, though, I worry about the mistakes that he's going to make. And I think when you think about Kevin O'Connell and this system, it's going to be on Darnold to stay within the system instead of trying to go off and do his own thing.
Yes. Look, Darnold does have the pieces. So we mentioned Justin Jefferson, which goes without saying, like maybe the biggest talent in the NFL. He's the highest paid non-quarterback, of course. And then you also have Christian Darrisaw, who may be one of the best at his position. Like when he wasn't in the lineup last year, like the amount of pressure that was being put on these Vikings quarterbacks was immense. So Darrisaw is a huge piece. And then you have a big signing in the offseason. You bring in Aaron Jones to kind of refill that running back room. They thought Alexander Madison could fill that role, but he was horrendous last year. So they bring in Aaron Jones to try to replace him. They still got Jordan Addison, who has all the talent in the world, but seems to be kind of a knucklehead. So do you think that this Vikings offense could be like a top half offense in the league? Or do you think that Darnold's limitations are enough to kind of weigh them down?
That's interesting. My gut says that I just can't get to the point where Sam Darnold is going to lead this to be a top half offense. I don't. It's one of those things where, like, one, I don't think he has the talent to get it done. Just to say that, like, I don't think this is going to be a resurgence. I think this is a guy that's been passed around the last few years and it hasn't clicked anywhere. And I don't really see why it would click here. They do have a lot of talent. However, as you mentioned, they've got some good players, but it's one of those things where, like, you know, kind of like a house of cards, right? You pull one out and everything crumbles. This is a league where injuries happen. This is a league where, Jordan Addison is already in legal trouble. and you're not sure he's also injured, right? So he's kind of dealing with
Yeah.
both of them. And this is a Vikings team that's already dealt with some injuries in training camp, and so because of that, there's too many things that I could see going wrong for them to where I'd put them in that regard. Could they finish middle of the pack if everything goes well? Yeah, I absolutely think so. But I don't know if I'd be able to say confidently that they will.
Yeah, and one more thing I forgot to mention was T.J. Hawkinson, who was a great tight end, but he
Yeah.
had a really bad knee injury, and it was suffered, I believe, in December. I don't know if he's on the PUP or like what his deal is to start the season,
I
but
think he is. I don't think he'll be there to start.
yeah, but even when he does come back, he's not going to be as dynamic. So, it's
Yeah.
going to put a lot of pressure on Jefferson. If Addison does, maybe get a suspension or he's hurt, he's out games, like it's going to be a little bit easier for defenses this game against Jefferson. So that is troubling on its own. But the thing that is troubling is this defense. This defense has some pieces to it that make it good, but there is a lot of concern, especially in the secondary. They just brought in Stephon Gilmore off the street, and he immediately is their number one corner. I mean, that is very
Yeah.
troublesome. I mean, they tried to address their corner position in the offseason. One of their additions unfortunately passed away, so that's very horrific, and there's nothing the Vikings can do about that. Unfortunate nonetheless for the Vikings because they were lacking in depth. It's been a problem area for years. And they did make some additions like to rookie locker room. Their pass rusher Dallas Turner. Is there any what do you look forward to the most for the Vikings, and what do you think might hurt them on defense?
Yeah, I mean, the silver lining is Brian Flores, who's their defense coordinator, who I think is one of the better defense coordinators in the league. And so when you think about the fact that, the talent necessarily isn't there, I think the defensive line, it could be, potentially a problem for them. You mentioned the secondary. Yes, unfortunate. They've had injuries. They've had just such terrible luck in that regard. I think the linebacking crew is a little to be desired. The defensive line could be interesting. They brought in Jonathan Grenard from the Texans, who had a really amazing year last year, so he kind of got paid. They also brought Blake Cashman from the Texans to be a linebacker piece to hopefully improve that group. And so there are definitely some names on this defense that I look at and say, well, Brian Flores could be able to get them and, get them up and going and get them to be one of the better defenses in the league. However, I just think injuries have already started to take their toll. Depth was already a question mark for this defense. And if this is going to continue to be the trend, they're going to be throwing out, undrafted guys to try to defend some of the better playmakers that we already talked about in this division. And I don't know if they're going to be able to do it.
Yeah, and we already talked about the Packers' great receiving core, the additions the Bears made. We know what the Lions have. That is what is most troubling because the Vikings have no chance in the division if they can't stop their division foes. The one thing, with such a tragic event happening in the offseason, there is, a heightened sense of motivation. Like we have something very important to play for, and that could lead to, a much more spirited effort on defense. So that is definitely something to look out for. But yeah, overall, there's just a lack of talent, through bad luck and injuries, and it's going to probably lead to Darnold having to throw from behind a lot this year.
Yeah, very true.
All right, so we're about to get into our preview for the division. But first, what are some games that we are looking forward to for these teams in this division for this upcoming season?
This is a good thing about having a division this good. There's a lot of really, really good games. Two I want to highlight are actually in the early part of the season. There's another one that's later on. But, the first Sunday Night Football game is a rematch of that playoff game last year between the Rams and the Lions, which was an amazing game. And so to get that rematch right away at the beginning of the season, also back in Detroit. So Stafford is going to go back there. That's a really, really interesting game. Week 2, the Bears go to Houston to take on the Texans. And so that's a Stroud, Caleb Williams, kind of a look at the future of quarterbacking game that I think is really interesting. And then one that I think we highlighted in the AFC East preview, but on Thanksgiving night, the Packers played the Dolphins. Two really interesting offenses going at it at that point in the season is really, really interesting to me. And so I think that's the other one that I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, those are all very good choices, and I'll just highlight a couple more. The Lions Bills is going to be a great game in December. I forget if it's in
Yeah.
Buffalo or for what it was, but these are two very
It's in
very good
Detroit.
teams. It's in Detroit, so I was gonna say it might have been a snow game. That would be pretty fun. But yeah, these very loaded rosters. So that's going to be a great one. And then they play the NFC West. So all three of these teams play the 49ers, and those are all going to be good games. But, particularly the Lions and the 49ers, week 17 rematch of the NFC Championship game. It is in San Francisco. And, based on how these teams are shaping up, it could have big stakes for the playoff picture, if both those teams are fighting for jockeying for position up there in the NFC. So, all these division matchups are going to make it's going to be a big deal deciding division, how a division turns out. So it's going to be tough, but let's dial it up. What is our prediction for the NFC North? 4-1.
I'm gonna put the Vikings last. I don't hate the Vikings. Like I liked a lot of what they were doing. I kind of thought they would go in last even before the McCarthy injury, just because of the rest of the division. It's such a contrast. Like those other three teams are like vibes are high. The Bears are doing hard knocks. The Lions are looking for a Super Bowl. The Packers are right there. They believe they can retake this division. And the Vikings, you said, they have that chip on their shoulder, but the vibes are just not great in Minnesota. You've got Tua Tagovailoa, basically saying he hates Brian Flores, right? Everything is just kind of falling apart. And I think, unfortunately, that's going to continue into this season. I don't think they'll be bad. I think they'll probably finish around something like 5-12, 6-11, more likely. But I've got them in fourth. I've got the Bears in third, a very close third, though. I like the Bears this year. I don't have a lot of confidence in Eberflus, but I do think they have the talent to go something like 9-8, 10-7, which I think would be good for third in this division. If they were not in as tough a division with those two others, I would probably pick them like definitively to make the playoffs, just because I think they have a good enough roster, and I think Caleb Williams will be good enough in his first year to do that. But I'm going to put them third. I really, really, really wanted to put the Packers first, but I'm going to put them second. I think there's still some question marks with their roster. I love LaFleur. I think Love is a fantastic quarterback. I think their offense is going to be electric this year. I think they've got a great pass rush. I think they feel really good. They showed exactly the kind of team that they can be in the playoffs last year, but it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think ultimately the talent will prevent them from having a better record than the team I have in first, which is the Detroit Lions. I just think their roster is way too good. Last year was the year they put their foot in the door. They didn't put their foot in the door. They kind of Kool-Aid man into the playoffs, and they firmly established themselves as one of the best teams in the league. And this year now, we mentioned all the young guys. There is no part of this team that is getting worse. That's just the truth. You can make an argument that, parity in the NFL is the way it is. Absolutely. I'm here. I hear that. I think to say that they're going to be just as good as next year is risky, because that kind of happens every year. We say that about certain teams, and some teams fall off and some teams barely make, those expectations. But the Lions just have such a talented roster, so many exciting young players. And I think Jared Goff is good enough. Despite what critics may say, he is good enough to get them to win this division again and go on another deep run in the playoffs this year.
It's hard to disagree with that order. I'm going to put a little more record context on this, because it's going to be boring when I say the same order. For the Vikings, I have them going 5-12. I think that they got a good coach, Kevin O'Connell, good DC, Brian Flores. So good players. Coaches that will get the most out of their players. So that won't be an issue there. It's merely going to be talent and injuries that are just going to hold them back. But Sam Darnold he's had the capability in the past to, put on a good performance and do enough for the offense to win. And of course, they have Jefferson. And then they've got some playmakers on defense, a good offensive line. But overall, I think this defense gets ripped to shreds. And they're just going to be not blown out, but it's going to be hard for the offense to keep up in a lot of games. The Bears, I'm going to put them at 9-8. And with all the talent on this roster, there's still a lot of young pieces and kind of a question mark at the head coaching position. So I think this defense will do a great job. They'll be at least an average defense, maybe above average. And they'll certainly hold teams in games, make games competitive. But there's a lot that goes into being an NFL quarterback that not everyone could be C.J. Stroud in their first year. So I think it's a reasonable prediction to say like middle of the pack, but with the amount of talent that they have, having an over 500 record is very feasible. The Packers, I think, can go 11-6. Great roster. Jordan Love is now in his second year. He's got that playoff experience now. And Matt LaFleur, excellent coach, does it year after year. People may have thought that Rodgers was carrying him in the beginning, but it's clear that LaFleur's got a great mind. He keeps the team consistent. He gets the most out of young players. He lets young players, he mixes it up on offense and defense and gets guys in there. So there are question marks on defense, but I have no doubt, especially with Joe Barry on. Like, that's another thing we didn't talk about, but there's a lot of potential there for this roster to be great. And for number one, I'm going to make this my bold prediction. I'm going to say the Lions have the best record in the NFL this year.
Yeah, I love that.
They could go 15-2. And so one thing that I was thinking about the other day was, the Lions have never been in this position before. They've never been the hunted. They were always, I got this from Colin Cowherd for the record, but they've never been he was the one that coined this term. He said they've never been hunted before. And Colin Cowherd thinks that the Lions will crumble under this pressure, but they don't know who this head coach is. Think about how much these players believe in Dan Campbell as a coach, and think about what Dan Campbell means to the city and what they're fighting for. Think about how close they were last year, and it's all those same guys as last year. I don't think it's there's no egos on this roster. They're young players, and a lot of these guys are going to get better. And I think it's very reasonable to say that this could be the top dog in the whole NFL. And we're talking about the NFC, people are going to say, what about the Niners? And I don't want to say why, because we got the NFC West preview coming up next. I will talk about the reasons for that. But the Lions will be the best record in the NFL. Now, will they win the Super Bowl? I'm just going to leave that open for now.
You're going to wait? We're going to wait. Leave them wanting more. I love that. I mean, look, the Lions are such it's such an easy pick. It's such a thing. I think everyone's trying to big brain it. They're a really good team, and they're going to be really, really good again. Their division is really tough, but we mentioned it right at the beginning, the offensive line. They just can control the game offensively. They've got so many great pieces on offense. They're so good. And so we'll end with my bold prediction, which is really stupidly bold, but it was something that I thought of just on the fly as I thought about all these great players. And I'm going to make the bold prediction that almost every single major award is going to be won by a player in this division. And so I'm going to give – some of these are dumb. I don't actually believe, but I think it's fun. Okay. I'm going to give Offensive Player of the Year to Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm going to give Defensive Player of the Year – I just had it. Who was I going to give it to? To Aiden Hutchinson, also from the Lions. I'm going to give MVP to Jordan Love.
Yeah.
I'm going to give Offensive Rookie of the Year to Caleb Williams. And I'm going to give Defensive Rookie of the Year to Dallas Turner just because. Maybe he has 15 sacks or something because they're trailing in all these games.
Not a lot of competition for Defensive Rookie of the Year. So the only one that I really can't see is Amon-Ra St. Brown.
There's too many good offensive players.
It can happen, but there's a lot of talent offense-wise.
The two I believe the most. I think Caleb Williams is like obviously the front runner for Offensive Rookie of the Year. I could see Jordan Love winning MVP because I think people still view the guys around him as like not the best, and I think he could put up a season, especially if they have a really good record that people point at and say, "Wow, he's doing a lot with not that much compared to some of these other guys." And then Aiden Hutchinson, Defense Player of the Year, is like one of my sneaky favorite picks, just because I think he's like really establishing himself as an amazing pass rusher, and usually it's a really good defense player on a really good team, and that kind of fits his bill.
100%. I mean, the top candidates like T.J. Watt. He's got a new injury every year, and still pointing, and he is getting older. We saw what happened to J.J. Watt as he got older, and Micah Parsons is another one. But I don't know if any of these guys are going to want to play hard for Jerry Jones after what he said today, which is like, I'm just the best. But it was ridiculous. But this is Cowboys episode, so regardless, I love the Hutchinson pick. I think it's got great potential.
Thank you.
All right, so we got one more division to go.
One left.
NFC West. We're going to come out with the episode on Wednesday, so tune in for that. Thank you guys once again for tuning in. I'm Shoop.
I'm Tian.
And you're watching Disney Channel. See you guys next time.